want to give the camera guys a clean beginning. Good. Welcome, everybody, to Games Learning Kids Panacea, or Pandora's Box, a title thought up by Doug Lynch. So I'm Warren Buckleitner. I'm the moderator for this next hour and a half, and I'm joined with some experts to talk about some big questions. The questions, as written from the description of the session, are: we've heard the hopes and fears around kids' screen time, mobile devices, and learning. We've collected a unique and highly qualified set of experts. So some questions are: is technology making children's lives better, or is it turning them into zombies? I have a Google News alert on children and technology, and so I pull up, I see whatever sort of mainstream Google algorithms are vacuuming up from the internet, and 90% of it is negative. And so most people, a lot of people, are very worried about this topic that we'll be covering. And
just remember, your search is your search, right?
It's true. It's also a prime target for ignorance. There's a lot of people who are just saying things that either aren't true or they don't know what they're talking about, or and it's very frustrating.
It seems to be going around these days.
Yeah, so we do have some beer for the panelists to deal with this topic. It is frustrating, and for those of us who have gray hair, we've seen this, and it's kind of comes around. So we'd like to move a little bit farther along. So I'm just going to start out by framing this idea that I think Doug wanted us to go, and then I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves, and we'll go. So the question is: technology making our lives better? I noticed that Ben has the Apple Watch, and I do too, and that somebody...
I've got a decal
Robin
from a
has
party last night, yes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of technology on our wrists here, but this is basically 128,000 Apple IIe's on my wrist. And when you think about it like that, we are living in the future. This is probably, I was thinking, like, what piece of technology best exemplifies all of this convergence. And I think the smartwatch idea, that because this is connected, it's voice activated, it's using all those technologies. And when I started reviewing software, it came on these things. So for those people under 40, I actually brought a floppy disk with me, and yeah, there it is. It's flops, see? And I used to review stuff. I think you might have too, Ben.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But that, you could have brought like the even bigger.
It's
Right,
true.
right, 8-inch,
This
right?
is high tech.
16, yep.
Yeah. So we
Do you
are.
have a notch in yours? Self-made notch. You didn't double notch it with a hole puncher.
This came
You
from.
used to be able to do that, so you could flip it over.
This came from Apple.
That came from.
So it's a
they wouldn't let you notch
it's the
it
real
until
deal.
Now.
Yeah.
Now you can have a notch in an Apple device.
And now, but I think Notch started Minecraft, so
And he made the
that's
iPhone.
the new Notch. And don't touch right there. That's really bad. That'll ruin your 128K.
Right. But those were your life memories, your works, your written works, your term papers. It was like everything you own.
Other proof
Dead media.
that you have been listening to, and I sat in on the session downstairs and found it very interesting to listen to other people who are dealing with the future technologies, is that at any given moment, Apple can hear what's going on. It's listening to my voice right now with my watch. So if I say Siri or Hey Siri, it starts that process to the cloud, and that's going on. Or there's Google Play, Google Home, which I really like. I've been playing with that, and also obviously the Echo. So there's also several toys that are using this technology, that always on technology, always listening. And there's a dark side to this, obviously, that's getting a lot of the news, but there's also a lot of really amazing potentials for this technology for assessment. Imagine teaching strategies that's always kind of tracking what language is coming out of a child's mouth. Carolyn, how could we start thinking about how 5 omnidirectional microphones in a classroom listening to every utterance. How could we use that data? So this technology, we really are living at the dawn of the 21st century of the information age. And our children are born into it. They don't really care what platform they're using or if someone's listening to them or not. They just know they want to play, and they know they want to grow, and they want to develop. And we know we love them, and we want the best for them. So those constants are there. Why does it seem right now that ignorance is thriving in 2016 and 2017 when we have these tools? There's this contrast that's going on. And I think that John Dewey would have a lot to say about what's going on and how technology is affecting our culture. John Dewey said he had a profound belief in democracy, whether it was politics, education, or communication. And in 1888, while he was at the University of Michigan, he said, democracy and one ultimate ethical ideal of humanity are, to my mind, synonymous. So he was a fierce advocate for education and improving the future for the next generation with information. He went into education and went to the University of Chicago because he saw schools as fuel for democracy and a civil society that will help us move forward. And I think those ideals might be old, but it's time to dust off John Dewey and those ideas. We need them more than ever. So I think old theories can help us a lot in this discussion. I would like to form a new political party, not Republican, not Democrat, but educated. And I'd like you all to join, and I think we should have meetings at places called universities, and we should share ideas, and we should check into things, and we should just move society forward. I think John Dewey would like that. I'm hoping we'll talk a little bit about business and the crazy monetization process of how some people are making so much money. Have you heard about Bitcoin lately, Robin? And how hard it is to sell an app on iTunes right now, and how many developers are struggling to make really good content without having to either find sponsors or funding. There is a problem with that. So anyway, we have some big topics, as I said, and I'd like to introduce our panel and let us start chewing on some of these. So we have, on my right, Robin Raskin, and Robin has a Wikipedia page, so you can look up her. Did you know that? Did you have a Wikipedia page? So Robin's Wikipedia page says that she's an American writer, author, publisher, TV personality, and conference and events creator. Did you know that?
No, because you can't write your own page. You find somebody to do that, and that's what they came up with. Yes.
So Robin works with the Consumer Electronics Show recently, and she'll be in Las Vegas. And she has hired some of the best minds in the world, me, to help her organize the CAPI Awards. Mm-hmm. And the CAPI Awards, which is Kids at Play Interactive, is a juried competition, and I'm one of the jurors, one of the votes, and the results were released yesterday. So we can share some of those examples of products that we thought were good. But one of the things, I first met Robin when I knew Robin before I met her, and she was editor of PC Magazine. And for a woman in tech, that was a huge accomplishment. Do you remember magazines?
They had these at the same time, right?
PC Mag was like this thick, and you could like just browse all of the things that Gateway was coming out with and so on.
Those were the days.
connecting the dots and trends. And she's and I organize a conference as well, and she's one of my favorite moderators because she's able to see things and sort of connect technology to culture. So I'm really happy that she's with us
Thank
today
you.
on this panel. I'm Warren Buckleitner. I'm editor of Children's Technology Review, which is a rogue master's thesis from the 80s that when I was reviewing all these software products. I was at High Scope Educational Research Foundation, which is an early childhood think tank in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And recently, I started teaching at the College of New Jersey. I teach interactive design. And I was just named a senior fellow with the Fred Rogers Center. And I'll be studying interactions and technology. So as you know, Fred Rogers was very interested in looking in a child's eyes and making that relationship happen with very low-tech means. And I'm interested in seeing how technology can either enhance or unenhance a relationship. And I think there are some really interesting things to look at there. So that's me. And then we've got a friend from a long time ago, and I haven't seen Ben Sawyer in many years. We've been on different conferences and so on. Ben started the whole genre of serious games. He's sort of the father of the serious game, and he's not that serious, really. He's working on Revolutionary War.
I have a few
Thing?
projects in development. So one on the American Revolution that's coming out.
Can you hear Ben?
Um,
That's good.
So one on the American Revolution that's coming out next year. We can show some screens from that. This is Play Forward, which I do at the Play to Prevent Center at Yale. And this is part of what will be a series of games that are aimed at helping youth avoid high-risk situations around drugs, alcohol, sexual risk-taking, smoking, and other things. And then we have another project that we're working on with a large sports organization in McGill University around helping young athletes understand how to win and compete cleanly. And we just finished a project for a startup on concussion safety. So basically, I work as a consultant working with game developers and my cast of thousands to help organizations figure out how to use games and game technologies for their purposes beyond entertainment mostly. We do some entertainment work with various indies as well.
So, Ben, were you ever a teacher?
No, but I do have two sons, 13 and 11, so I feel like I'm teaching every day. I'm also learning, too.
13 and 11.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we do have now we're moving into some teachers. We have Brian Mack, who works at Teaching Strategies, and Brian knows both how to do some finger plays as well as how to mix a vodka tonic. True?
True.
It's true. You didn't know I'd say that.
I did not.
Yeah. So she's. I think that's called liberal arts.
Sure.
Much needed.
And you also have a child, and you haven't. How old?
She's 16 months, and I was saying before we walked up here that this is the first time I left her overnight, like to get on a train and go somewhere. So she did well, I did well, all is well.
Good.
But I'm anxious to get on the train at 4:27 to
Right.
get home and see her.
And her name is?
Lucy.
Lucy. So this panel is dedicated to Lucy. I hope she watches this. And we're talking about this topic for her generation, a child born within the last 18 months. So she'll grow up in a world that we hope, if we work together, we'll make the world a better place. So tell us about teaching strategies and
Tell me your past. Pick four numbers so we can load you back up again.
sure.
Sure, I'll chat for a second while you're doing that. So Teaching Strategies is an early childhood education company that creates curriculum and assessment solutions birth through third grade. So while we don't create child-facing technology, we use technology in a way to help elevate the profession of educators and make technology and data not scary, but more accessible. Historically, early childhood teachers as a profession are somewhat intimidated by technology, and data almost has had a bad connotation connotation. I know when I was early as a teacher, data was what could get me promoted or fired. And instead, data needs to be something that can inform my instruction and help me have more meaningful conversations with families, and help how do I introduce technology in a way that's developmentally appropriate in the early childhood space, and really know at the different ages of children what's appropriate in that space and not. So we're excited to be a part of these discussions when we think about how to make technology that much more meaningful in the space, particularly of early childhood.
So I always worked at High Scope, and I was kind of like your competition, I think,
Yes, we have similar philosophies, yes.
right? Well, we're fighting the battle for a
Good things.
good reason. We're developmentally appropriate practice, helping early childhood educators just do their jobs better. And so you guys have been doing great work. I've followed teaching strategies, and it's great to see all the stuff that you've done. And Brian has a lot of videos I was checking out on how to do things. And you do know finger plays, so we're gonna do. You need to do something.
Okay.
Yeah. So Carolyn is. So we have a literacy expert here, and when I say that, helping a child learn to read and write is, if you think about what it requires mentally to learn how to encode and decode, it is the world's most complicated achievement that a human can do. There's no other species that can do what we humans can do, and the process of making a generation of literate, however you define that, people is tough. Technology has given us incredible potential, and you've been studying it. You're at NYU.
Yeah, so I'm on the early childhood literacy faculty here at NYU in the Department of Teaching and Learning, and I focus, part of what I focus on is training and preparing our teachers, our undergraduates and graduate students, to teach kids to read. So they're going to be teaching kids ages 4 to 7, and we know that those are the prime years, right, for learning to read. So I teach and advise students, and also do a lot of work in the community, sort of outreach with institutions around building teachers' capacity to better teach reading. And before that, I was a first and second grade teacher in Compton, California for many years, and had the joy and challenges of teaching kids growing up in high poverty backgrounds how to read. And it was the most powerful experience of my life, which is probably why I stayed for almost 10 years. Just got addicted to that, having kids come in and look at symbols and not know what to make of them. And then suddenly at the end of the year, they're reading books like Frog and Toad and Henry and Mudge, and that was just so amazing and magical. And the fact that 58% of kids in New York City finishing third grade cannot do that really makes me angry. And that's where I come at this work. So I was really, when Warren was saying, we're in the future, well, some kids are in the future, but if you're growing up poor in this city, you have a really low chance, actually, of learning to read, because only 42% are proficient, and 58% of kids are not proficient readers at the end of third grade in New York City. So our program at NYU in training early childhood teachers has a really big focus on equity. And when it comes down to educational equity, it's really about literacy, right? Being able to read. So I've been working with kids for many years, and also, have a practice working with kids who are dyslexic. So I think that the way I come to this panel is sort of, what can technology do to reach all of the kids that need to learn to read? How can we leverage technology? But also, my research at NYU has been looking at the commercial apps available for families around learning to read. So we looked at the 60 most sort of popular, common, written about early reading apps, and we've done an analysis of the wild, wild west that it is.
Is that analysis available, or is it still unpublished?
It's not publicly available. I have a little video I'm going to show. Maybe it's a mashup of what's out there. It's a year old, and it's amazing how much happens in a year. I could really update it from just last year, but it gives a good idea of how overwhelming it can be as a parent or teacher to try to figure out what's good to put in front of kids. So we're working on that. But a lot of teachers and parents want to use technology to improve reading. Who doesn't? There's tons of things out there that advertise themselves as reading games. And that just can take many different manifestations. So we're hoping to sort of curate that process for parents and teachers. Because still, apps or reading games are being used as digital babysitters a lot of the time, not as instructional tools when they have a much greater potential.
And it certainly, the definition of literacy is different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, and that understanding, it's more than this kind of literacy, but it's understanding how information works and how you find things and how to speak correctly to Alexa. It really is.
Don't say her name. You never know what'll happen.
So I like to say that I have two daughters, and I've raised them to be bilingual, both Windows and iOS. So let's go right down the line here and talk about some of the trends that are going on in technology. Let's start from a Moore's Law point of view. What technologies are you most excited about, and why? Robin?
Okay, so there's so many. I would say artificial intelligence right now is about at the level of, I don't know, a toddler, but its potential to.
You have your article?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You wrote on it.
I did. So I'd really look at what AI means, and I know it means quite a number of different things to different people, depending on what you're doing. But the idea of using a body of information, data, to start to learn and make inferences about the thing you're looking at is pretty interesting. We're seeing a lot of augmented reality and virtual reality. Not so much in the schools yet, but the beginnings of augmented reality. It will be somewhat helpful to kids, and we can talk about how later. Certainly voice activation. Probably so right now, about 10% of U.S. homes have a voice.
Your mic's doing something.
Too close.
But look up there, Robin. Look at that.
Oh, whoa.
There's your notes.
Oh, right.
This is what
There's
kind
my
of
trend.
panel you're going to have here, folks.
Oh my God! Did I say anything bad? No. So.
Now, where can people read this?
This is on the CES blog. If you go to ces.tech, so for them, and this is really an interesting article because if you read past the headline, when you ask a parent, when you ask a family, do you own any IoT devices? They have no idea. When you explain what an IoT device is, then they say, oh yeah, we have, Alexa. And so it's about 10% penetration in U.S. households now of personal assistants. It will be the hottest sold family item at $29 for an
IoT
Echo.
is Internet of Things, right?
Yes, and the internet, so the way people will learn what the Internet of Things is with an individual thing, like an Alexa, like a connected toy. And what's going to happen in the next year, in your car, in your home, the Internet of Things will start interacting with each other. And so the best way to say it is, my refrigerator finds out it's out of milk and calls Alexa, who calls Amazon, who calls Whole Foods, I guess, and the milk shows up. So when you're going to start to see commerce being done and learning and things being done, tasks, your washing machine will say, hey, my clothes, I shouldn't be doing them at 2 in the afternoon. The meter will cost less, the electric meter, at 10 at night, so whatever. And so they're going to use common intelligence from their environments to start to talk to each other. And it is going to make a lot of bedlam before any real progress, but it will definitely change our lives. What is it? AR, VR, we talked about, IoT.
I think you also mentioned that will a child have, I saw this in an article, will a child have digital footprints before they make real footprints? And the fact that how algorithms are tracking families and what they search for, and there's a dark side to this. There's also a good side to this. But you sort of connected me to that as well. So
Yeah, there's, since the day the internet came into being, it's been a double-edged sword, and we can bet that it will be in the future. The internet's about to radically change because of if the worst case net neutrality scenarios come to pass, and certain companies can have faster speeds and access to people willing to pay more, it will be a different internet. But I also think there's systems like IoT, and don't get me started on cryptocurrencies, but basically, Bitcoin, for all you read about it, it's really an angry reaction to having middlemen. I mean, when you get right down to what is the essence of cryptocurrencies, people just don't want banks making profits with small print and contracts that they don't want to read. They want to take responsibility for a very utopian idea of spending money. And so if the internet radically metamorphoses to a new being, which it may under some of the rulings, something else will come up in its place.
And I think that we have to, as adults right now, as parents, as grandparents, and as researchers, we need to think about how to use this technology for the benefit of making relationships better, of making family units better, of making the limited time human beings have as a child, making those things richer. And it's tricky. It's really tricky. These technologies are being used. Commercialism is creeping in. The government's not keeping up with it. There is bad practice, and I'm saying that as a reviewer. I see it every day. There's manipulative practice creeping into the preschool and in the playroom. And so that we ordered these sirens just to make that point.
Right. Little.
So it's a double-edged sword. It offers new potentials, but I think the first step is awareness. We have to know what's going on and keep an eye on it and be advocates for what we know is right. Ben, you have any ideas?
So I came to talk about games, and so I'm going to talk about games. So in terms of like trends and things, I think the underlying thing that's going on is that, you know, the number one thing in terms of games is more people are playing games than ever before. All kinds of games. Another important trend to that I see with kids and modern day sort of game players is that their sense of what is a game is very different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. Even though we have these big tentpole games, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, what we see a lot going on now is people just playing all kinds of things. Think little widget-like games that get online in browsers or on their phone as an app. I mean, if you look at the top performing games, often the graphics are incredibly rudimentary, which thinking as a game designer, I'm like, because the reason they like that game, besides maybe it's free, is that there's something intrinsic in how you play it that they're finding. And so we're getting beyond just the sort of surface quality of games, and we're really seeing and building, I think, increasingly a sophisticated group of consumers around all kinds of different games. Why board games are going up in popularity is not just because we got nostalgic. It's actually because games got us interested in more complex games and more well-designed games, and people went back and started looking for that in their board games as they look for new types of ways to play. And so we're seeing this kind of trend where games are everywhere. They're kind of becoming ubiquitous in our lives, and that's why you're starting to see them ever more in the classroom. And what's interesting is you used to see sort of like educational software was sort of how we described educational games. And you had things like Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego and Reader Rabbit and Math Blaster. I mean, stop me if you've played these, right? Oregon Trail, right? Which we just had. There's a great.
I'm going to waive this whenever.
There's a great online talk from GDC, Game Developers Conference last year, where they did a retrospective review with the designer of Oregon's Trail. And if you haven't seen it, you really should. He actually unveiled the source code that he had found in his attic. It was this long. It was on a printout from like a PDP that they had programmed it on at the University of Minnesota, I believe. And, you know, so what happened though is, like, I have to be honest, I don't think I ever played any of those games. My educational software were like actual games, things that like I just would play for fun, and ended up being, you know, games where, you know, role-playing games where you learn to manage a party of adventurers and the resources they had, or the original Civilization, or building games. And now what we have is interesting in the sense that we have educational software in the forms of like sort of new work coming out of universities and independent developers that looks a lot more like what we kind of had hoped educational games would be. It's like really is like sort of Oregon Trail on steroids, where it's either simulative or it's complex games in terms of their design and sophistication. And they're meant to be played almost like sort of more widely. They're involving educational practices, and it's not just like sort of flashcard style gameplay. Even then, in the flashcard style gameplay, we're still seeing better innovation, where we're drawing from different types of theoretical practices that get people involved in practicing things that they should, and getting the kinds of sort of coachable moments or dynamic gameplay. We have some gameplay research going on at the University of Washington where they're connecting basically what would be sort of drill and skill like games up to algorithms behind the scenes that reinvent the game, that change the rules of the game as the kid plays it, so that the game can actually become more sophisticated to that person who's playing and trying to learn from it. So there's a lot going on in this sense where the driving force is a ubiquity of games, a ubiquity of sort of better designed games, and games that sort of don't look necessarily educational or and are not necessarily meant to be like perfect entertainment, but it's just sort of everything's kind of blurring. As Will Wright sort of said, the designer of SimCity says, we live now the most exciting time from game development in like a Cambrian explosion of video game design and computer game and board game design. And there's so many different types. The problem, though, is that the adoption of these games in contexts where learning can happen is really low and really poor. So I've been designing these kinds of games and working to try and get them out into the field for well over 10 years. And I can tell you right now, there are very few educational games, be they for the public or for schools directly, where I could say that they're really sort of having a move the needle effect. Right. And there's a lot of different reasons for it. One, the biggest reason is most of them are like really piss poor designed. I won't go into how they're designed badly. They're just bad on any number of levels. The second is that the company, even when we have good, what myself and my friends would say are good games, it's hard to get them into schools, not so much because schools will push back. It has more to do that the way we go about in ed tech creating content-based businesses is we spend all of the initial money you give us building the game. And then we bring it out to the market, but there's no money left in the enterprise, be it social or commercial, to then get the game into a return on investment that just can support the ongoing sales of the game. And so what happens is you see lots of things where people go, well, whatever happened to that? And I was like, well, basically they didn't survive their sales staff costs. They couldn't afford them, they couldn't keep them, and they couldn't generate enough sales to keep that process going. So we see that. And the other part of it is just in general, we don't see things that scale really well. And the two ways that I describe this is that we either have good games that don't get out enough, or we have bad games that get out a lot, but when we go back to measure their effects, we find that the effects are really small to non-existent. So somewhere there's this sort of like gap where we're just not getting good quality stuff developed and good quality stuff out and being used at scale. And those kinds of barriers and how we overcome them, that's the challenge this field faces. 10 years ago, I would have said it's like not having enough talented people trying to do this. That's not the problem right now. The problem is getting over these second and tertiary levels of barriers. And just to wrap up in one simple way, Play Forward, Elm City Stories, is still not out on the market, even though we've shown that we're increasing kids' knowledge. We're getting secondary effects in terms of whether or not they have planned behaviors potentially to avoid drugs and alcohol and sexual risk-taking. And a lot of that has to do with just the fact that it's taken this long to get something all the way through development, testing, the studies, publishing those studies where we can't release the game because we can't have our control group get a hold of the game and skew our results. We're following these kids for 2 years or longer. So the process by getting an efficacious game out is it's almost like launching a drug trial. And so all of a sudden now we have to re-engineer the game to make sure that we're on the right platforms, and we're gonna have to build a sales staff around. I mean, it's a very, very cumbersome process.
Ben, you sound frustrated.
Well, I'm frustrated but hopeful, but that's the part. I'm saying it's like games are, for all their ubiquity, it's like that saying, it's like the future's here, it's just unevenly distributed.
Totally.
Yeah, well said. I asked Ann McCormick, who started a learning company once, what she thought about the iPad, and she said, it was the computer we always dreamed of. Imagine a retinal display screen when the Apple II and learning company was done on 32 colors or 64 colors, and 10-hour batteries and the ability to pull content from anywhere. So we really do have the pipeline, but it's hard being a game designer, and you've lived through a period that.
Well, I mean, it's very much gold rush mentality, whether it's educational games or like entertainment stuff. I mean, for every person like Notch who made $1 billion making a fantastic game that I sunk 4 man-years of my life into, and know inside and out. There's thousands and thousands of developers who are building things who barely make $3 a day. I mean, the fact is we have more people who are capable of building games now than at any time in
Well,
my
and
lifetime.
the technologies like Unity, and it's easier. And ARKit has made, Jesse Schell at Carnegie Mellon said, ARKit, the plugin for iOS, took 30 days of work, and that you can do in 1 day. So the tools are getting.
But you have
easier.
more people want to do this stuff. The problem is that they're not making any money, yet they keep doing it. So what I want to try and figure out, and what I would implore everybody in this audience to do, is if we could potentially find ways so that they could make a sustainable living building great games for education, that would basically open the floodgates. If you could have even 1/10 of the amount of independent game designer work going from the stuff they're building now to the stuff Hord's needs that you could outline for them, you would see probably like as many as 500 new, app-based educational games come out every year. That's just 10% of what comes out. Now, if even only 10% of those are good, you would have more great products coming out every year than you do now. So there is just complete imbalance. And part of it's because they want to make games. They want to make their game. They want to make the entertainment game they dreamed of making. I get that. But at the same time, when I talk to them a little bit after they've gone through that kind of motion, I say, don't you want to just be able to keep making games and make a living? Then they start to say, yeah, well, where's the sustainability in that? And we know there's no sustainability in entertainment games. There is almost zero for the average game designer. And right now, there's no sustainability in educational games, but there could be. And trying to figure out how that happens so that we bring over those indies would be a huge, huge opportunity for this room.
So Ben, look at other models like fitness and health where there is gamification. That's
Well,
actually
I started the Games for Health project, so
Right.
I know quite a
right.
bit.
So
yeah.
it's actually if you're motivated, the game they've shown that you can lose weight, you can take care of chronic conditions.
Right, but
so,
most of those weight games have failed on any number of levels, with the exception of a couple that were sales successes.
Right.
Sales successes,
Right.
much like
Right.
Thigh Masters.
Yes, well, that's right. You know what they say about weight. You lose it, you find it. Yeah.
Right.
But there's that, and then there's the time that you talked about to get a game through your system. Look at Fidget. I mean, they just went rogue and no marketing, no television campaign, just got it out there. And so the question to all of you is, do you start going rogue with good kids experience and start from the kid up?
Well, so Ben, you got us off the question, and I need to give
Sorry,
you.
I do this
I
very
just-
often.
yeah,
I
there's
do
just
a good
one-
job of
you know,
hijacking panels, so I mean,
Yeah.
It was
I'll
great. It was great. I think you got to the core of the issue. I mean, from my perspective, there's a lack of research and a lack of science informing those games before they're designed, right? So there's efforts to do research at a lot of these games to see if they have efficacy. But if you look at a lot of these games, they, at least the early reading games that we've looked at, they're not designed based on the advances in reading science that have gone on for the last 10 to 20 years.
So there are a couple of reasons for that I know, spanning both lots of universities and independent game designers, is that the market for those products, so for me, most educational games that I want to build start after third grade, because I think that the sub-third grade market is just filled with really, really bad actors.
Yes.
And
It's true.
also,
true.
not necessarily.
I would disagree with that.
Well, great. We'll disagree later.
Okay.
Let me just finish one thing. There's also
We
a
need
lot
some
of
beer,
well-meaning
some beer up here
people.
quickly.
There's a lot of well-meaning people who think that building a reading game or a math game at that level, at that sort of sub-third grade level, is sort of doing what they kind of think the way they learned.
Yes.
So it's very easy to build sort of second grade level educational games because in your mind it is. Because from a curriculum standpoint, how hard is it to teach 2 + 2? Right? Like when you're the designer, when you're the maker,
Right.
you bring, and so there's very little interaction between those developers, be they indie or commercial, and the researchers doing that. And that's a huge problem. That problem doesn't continue as far up the line. You get much more formative work for games above that level, mainly because no one is building games above that level because they don't know how to crack that market. That sub-third grade market, they know how to do it. Gobs of advertising, gobs of little Einstein style, marketing, emotional marketing crap. And that's why you live in that space and have to deal with it. I think there's a way to solve it, which is to get the formative research out as almost an open published space and then bring game designers in to read that work, independent game designers who really do care about doing formative research.
So Brianne, how is teaching strategies using technology? Is there any technologies that you're excited about?
Yeah, so we, as I mentioned earlier, we don't develop child-facing technology. So instead, it's more about what is the teacher-facing and caregiving technology. As I mentioned it, when I was first teaching, this idea of a digital portfolio was totally foreign to me, right? I had my pizza boxes that was filled with children's work that a couple times a year I'd sit down with families and we would talk through it, right? Well, there's a whole slew of reasons why that doesn't work, right? Children should take their work home the day they make it, and that's how they talk about the process instead of the product. But there's still valid information that a teacher is learning. So us moving towards a digital portfolio, children can still take their works home and have works in progress that a teacher is kind of capturing and building a digital portfolio over time. So that's one of the things, and having a documentation app. So I'm not using a digital camera and having my memory stick that I have to put in my computer and save to a folder. And that's what I did for many years as a teacher. So how do we make this happen instantly? That's not a distraction. Teaching strategies, the relationships between teachers and children are the most important thing. So how do we have technology help build those relationships and not have it be distracting, especially in a space where teachers are intimidated by that technology? One of the other things we're doing is having data inform instruction in a more meaningful way. I used to sit down once a week with my assessment data, and then I'd think through my small group instruction, and I would collate what goes where. And we realized we can have data do that in seconds for a teacher. If a teacher is committed to building formative assessment assessment on an ongoing basis and capturing what we call preliminary ratings, then every day when she pulls up a small group experience, children's names just populate. It was one of the things I pulled up on the screen, but children's names will just populate along a teaching sequence at whatever that most recent assessment data is. So a teacher can then, in the moment, scaffold and individualize his or her instruction based on work they've already done. We have to take data away from just being punitive and something around funding and get that return on investment back into teachers' hands to understand that data can be a part of the work that they're doing. And then I would think the last piece is really around online professional development. That's been a big venture for us in the last year or so. A lot of our programs don't have the financial resources to bring out a consultant to come and do face-to-face professional development for them. And when I was a director of a program, I had a group of teachers that came to me that said they wanted to take a Saturday workshop on Christmas crafts with no mess. And that's how they were going to get their CEU credit, right? Well, I just about fainted because there's something wrong with every single one of those words being a ongoing professional development course in my program. So there was a learning curve as I took over that program. But to me, that's such a driving force of why this online professional development is necessary. We've got teachers that need continuing education units, but they should get it on things like positive guidance and early learning strategies. And
So I pulled
what are
that
those?
up.
Yeah, so if you scroll up a little, this is just an exercise on writing poems, but if a teacher were to pull this, you see children's names are pre-populated along a teaching sequence. So this is information that for a couple years at Teaching Strategies, teachers have had access to because she's made a preliminary rating from in the block area, a child creates a city with a group of other children, and she gathers a documentation note talking about some of the emergent reading or writing that's happening in that experience. And then that then informs her ability to populate the next time she's doing that writing experience to pick up where a child's skills left off. And then we allow them to toggle over to assess at the same time. So right in the moment on a tablet device, they're capturing that next assessment. So assessment doesn't become an event, but it's just part of our practice and part of great teaching that I'm really present. And we don't just assess every 6 to 9 weeks, but we needed technology to be a part of making that more of the everyday experience. I don't even know where you are right now.
I just reset some kid's profile.
This
so-
is a demo account. There's nothing
He's going
real in
back.
there.
Good.
But this is another example of technology. Inter-rater reliability is when you're using a technology tool, when you're using research-based progressions of development, we have to know that teachers in New York City versus Mobile, Alabama versus Annapolis, Maryland, I'm from, that they're looking and using this information reliably across all of our users. So it's actually a mock version of portfolios they go through and get a score and feedback based on that, and then are kicked to online professional development for free that then can fill in some of those gaps in places where they struggled.
So for documenting and celebrating achievements, growth, development, milestones, this is incredible. I mean, every parent, every teacher has a device, and every child has a device that they can document their own growth and development.
So that's an interesting piece too when we talk about kind of that under third grade space. We have to be really careful about knowing what those developmental milestones are and where that's appropriate. Children in infant toddler classrooms don't have devices, right? That's not something that we support in our curriculum resources, but in the preschool environment, they do start engaging with that. We think about in the K to third space, we want to have a child-facing version of documentation, right? How do they capture their own work and tag that to objectives and to their student goals? And so we can continue to grow that, but there can't be this one-size-fits-all, especially in early childhood. And we also have to help families. We were chatting about this before we started. An infant caregiver who cares for a child in their first 6 weeks, 6 months, 16 months of life, they're a lot of times that family's first trusted advisor on how to navigate things like technology and the decisions that they're making in the home. We've got to do a better job of empowering our educators in the early childhood space to feel confident with research and with best practices to help families start making better decisions. It's about co-viewership, right? If I'm with an infant and a toddler and we're engaging with this, it's not a babysitter, but it's, and then what are the tools that we can use technology just to be parent-facing or family-facing?
So if I can also say,
Yeah.
along with co-viewership comes co-playship.
Yes.
The number one request we see when we survey kids about games that shows up that everybody, when I say it, everybody goes, really? They just don't, like, depending on the age of the audience, is when they want to talk about games, is they wish that parents would play games with them, video games with them. And we actually did some experiments building controllers that the kid could do the complex part and the parent could do the
Right.
simple part.
Leveling, right?
Right. Well, the the fact is that kids really do for the kids who play lots of games, they really do want that. And there's, what we know about media on the roughest level is any type of co-viewership or co-playship mitigates what we might assume to be negative effects of those media. We won't get into every last little what's negative, what's not. I know it's in the notes that we're supposed to discuss this, but the point is that for some reason many parents opt out of playing games. They think that games and video games are not something that they should play with their kids, which is really, really disheartening. The other thing that also happens along that line is parents do not actually spend time they would police their kids' reading more than they would police their kids' game playing. And I don't mean the amount of game playing, right? I mean what their kids are playing. And I don't even mean violent game versus non-violent game. I was in a GameStop 8 years ago, and the parent was trying to figure out something to get for their kid. And I said, there's this game, Chiba Robo, it's amazing, it's really cool. This is something your kid has never played before. I overheard them, so I butt in. And they go, oh, and the kid kind of looks at it and he puts it back, and the mom pulls off Call of Duty and lets him buy it. And I'm like, he's probably played 1, 2, 3, and 4 by now. How many more do you need? This is a really neat game, and that deals with some incredible gameplay and issues. It would have been diversity. This is most families where I worry about their gameplay, it's not the time. It's that they're listening to the same song over and over and over, and they don't see the difference. They would never let that happen in their household. The same record be played over and over and over. Well, it wouldn't be a record, but the same iTunes file over and over and over on. They'd have the game equivalent of that, and they don't understand this. We have this diversity of media in every other format, but not in games, and I think it's missing.
I think that translates to the classroom too, what you were saying around kind of not that traction, and I can speak more specifically to early childhood where it kind of falls off. It's because we have to get the teacher involved, right? So it can't be something that just happens in a corner in a room, and it's oh yes, it's your 15 minutes of screen time, but if these solutions are promoted in a way that's here's the output for you as the educator, these are the decisions that you can make based on what you're learning from that, or this is how you actually make this part of your practice to interact and complete this game with a child, and you have a role and they have a role, and there's some kind of feedback that's happening there, that's going to help them get more traction as well.
I definitely think there is a social enterprise business for colleges, and some are starting this. Wisconsin's done a little bit, MIT with Teacher Education Project, Eric Klopfer's work. But in terms of a teacher's college or other things, having a week where teachers can come and get trained on how to use games in their classrooms or in the ecosystem of their classroom, because actually I don't think games and video games really work well in classrooms. I think they work well outside of the classroom, but in conjunction with the classroom, or even just guiding kids in terms of their diet. My school sends home recommended reading. Why isn't there a recommended gameplay list? Right, there are good games that kids could play. But there is there's very, very little professional development available for teachers around games. There's some, it is out there, but there's definitely a huge business for the right group that does that kind of work if they assemble it.
And for how to teach teachers to teach reading through games.
Yeah,
right?
or any particular
anything.
subject
Yeah.
that might be their specialty.
So speaking of reading, I have this video that I found up here, Carolyn. What is this?
So this would be, so this is a video, it's a mashup. I should probably come over there because I'll pause it.
I can.
But
yeah, go ahead.
I didn't know we were going to be showing it, so didn't prepare necessarily for it. But last year when my research team and I analyzed all these early reading apps, one of the biggest epiphanies we had was that it's just a total wild, wild west. And it really, there's everything under the sun. And if we can't navigate it, and we find it overwhelming, how are parents and teachers going to navigate it? So we put this together just to give, it's a 3-minute overview of sort of what's out there when you type in learning to read apps for the sub-3rd grade group. But I'll pause it. I usually show it after explaining how the brain learns to read, so you can look at it in that context, but I'll pause it just to point out a couple things.
I'm assuming audio is going to work, so I don't know where this goes, but we'll try it.
We'll hold this close by.
Yeah, if it doesn't.
You might have to hit play again.
It's okay. I did that before. There you go.
unless it took me off. It was through my.
Are we off the internet?
I think it's still on, but who knows? All right, well, we tried.
Did you want to try again?
What about the one without branding? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, these are this one, the copy of V2 WordBird
Maybe the other one will work.
with no branding. It's not as good.
I think we're
Let's see
getting
what
the same
happens.
problem.
Yeah. We could try. I don't know.
See if I can open up another browser. But Carolyn, you have been looking at a lot of apps, and
Yeah.
I do want to argue with Ben about apps, quality work, and
I didn't say apps.
yeah.
Games.
Well,
Games.
Ben and I, we need to have a beer after this. The
Beer in the plural form of.
yes, I agree. So I've been seeing some brilliant work, and I want to show some of Tiny Bop's work. Because
Let me say, I like their work, but what I have a problem with some of this stuff is that some stuff is educational just merely because it's exposing kids to things. But I'm more interested at that age in things that could make a difference to things they've been exposed to.
Yeah.
It's really easy. If I showed up tomorrow and said to your kids, does anybody know how to cook? No. Okay, I'm going to teach you how to cook toast. And you went home and said, hey, I learned how to cook toast. That's learning, right? You were exposed to it. But is that really what we're trying to do? And that's what I worry about with some of I love Tiny Bop's work, but I feel like it's just like exposure learning, which is fine, but that's not necessarily the difference between taking someone from, who can't read to someone who can.
Exactly.
yeah, but Ben, that's cool.
Right.
Yeah, that's the problem. You come home and you're like, oh, this is cool. But let me tell you, I could teach my kids about this stuff without the app.
Yeah.
I need stuff that I can't teach my kids.
And also this stuff, I tell my graduate students here, it can be educational. It's not going to do any harm, but is it instructional, right?
Right.
That's really what we talk about. Is there embedded assessment? Or is a kid just watching this and we don't know what they're taking away? Then it's educational, great, right? But is it instructional?
Which is why I didn't even want to do this panel, because game is you can't define, education and learning you can't define, and we have experts here that are
Right.
really smart who
I think the issue is this.
I pulled up the elephant.
Wait,
the-
let's argue. I
Okay.
think the issue is this, that underlying what we want to achieve with some of this stuff is a single word, which is utility, right? What is the purpose of the existence of this object? And that object then put in a context, right? Is it in a classroom? Is it in a learning point? Is it a utility towards achieving a reading level? And the problem with this sort of stuff, as neat as it is that the utility of it is literally to say to a parent, your kid is doing something that you find, you, the parent, find sophisticated, and therefore you feel good about that. But that's not the same thing. And what I would say is that there's actually grander utility than that. This stuff is great for what it is, but its utility is much, much lower than its facade makes you appreciate.
So I'll challenge you for a minute. So like
There's- we
go
do have
back.
a question.
Okay.
I was going to ask, what have you found in terms of trends for any teaching coding to students through gaming?
Sure. So there actually have been a bunch of different games that have come out in the last few years that deal with coding concepts and things like that. I've just started to look into them with a little bit more of a specific approach. So I'm going to be very, very poor here. But Zachtronics' recent games that have come out, Shenzhen and others, are really, really interesting, sort of cutting-edge games around coding principles. There was a couple of others from the guys who did, I think, World of Goo, Instructables, I think it was called, or something. And it was an interesting game that involved coding concepts. There's been a lot of mod stuff done around Minecraft that's really interesting. The whole learn to code movement is a whole other panel, honestly, Warren, like for next year. But I think in terms of games, I come back to this, is that the really interesting part about getting kids to code from games is saying to kids, kind of like what was said this morning by David Coleman, which is like, do we say to you, do you want to learn to program, or do we say to you, you want to make a game? And that in order to make a game, there's lots of things
Yep.
that we have to do. And that can be wrapped up in it. The biggest problem when I've done some work with kids making games with coding, is that their frame of reference for games is quite sophisticated. So the first thing that you really need to do is get them to start thinking about what could they make a game about that's feasible to the level of programming that you're going to do, so that you can keep them in tune. The other part of it that I think could be interesting and isn't done as much as I would hope is I would love to see kids make games that are like the way you would do a book, the way you would do a report. So instead of saying to a kid, let's learn how to make games, it would be like they kind of know games a little bit, especially paper games or card games, right? And say like, oh, well, we're studying ecosystems. Let's make a game about ecosystems. Or my son is learning to program. He's really into sports. So what we've been doing is writing little sports simulations that are just text, right? Like here's like where we like write out the play-by-play. Like this month we're doing tennis. Last spring we were doing baseball. And so we write these like little sort of Lua-based scripts that simulate a tennis match or simulate a baseball game in that sense. So there's some interesting work going on in games that you can look at. I'd look at Zachtronic's work, really. It's a higher level than younger kids. Tiny Bop actually had one a little bit that they were playing with as well.
So I did want to make a point about Tiny Bop because it ties into the business side. Tiny Bop has been struggling selling apps at $1.99 and $2.99 in the whole app economy. And so what they're doing, and I don't know if this is going to work or not, but they've taken the maybe 60 different little activities like this one, and any teacher knows that there's a time when you're teaching where you want to show, you do a thing on the nervous system. And there's a Tiny Bop activity that's perfect. And in terms of, if you took all of the activities on the nervous system, there are very few that are as good as this one, or to show how this works, this claw works. I can lecture for hours, but if I can put this simulation, oh, did you see that? To show.
Did anybody learn anything just now?
Will you just
don't
listen to him? This is about business, Ben. So just give me a second. What they were struggling to sell these as individual apps. This is one piece of a thing called Mammals, right? So $1.99. How do you monetize that? How do you pay programmers? So what they did is they broke up the entire package into a subscription. Schools and libraries have a different budget system, and if you can tap into their learn what a purchase order is, they've still used, and that kind of thing. Tiny Bop sells this for $1,000 per school per year, and you can access it on any of the browsers. And that's another thing that you have to be very, platforms. You have to be very smart about. Chromebooks, you have to be, because that's a lot of schools are using Chrome and Android. You need to be thinking about how the pipeline reaches the consumers. I would argue that the supply-demand for quality content like this is it's healthy and it exists. There is a big demand for this. I think the pipeline is quite confused and it's sorting itself out. But I've seen, and I'm speaking as a reviewer, I've seen some really high-quality experiences. I don't think they're making money. Look at Touch Press, for example. I mean, it's the best. You can give a child an interactive solar system that they can explore. We'll save the debate whether that's learning or not later. The point is that this medium is really, the multi-touch medium is really powerful. And if used well, it can help teachers do their job better.
So
Are we
I'm-
taking questions? I was just wondering if there was questions.
Yeah, and you,
He's had it.
yeah, I'd love to take some more questions from you guys, and we have microphones, so let's let you jump in on this.
Hi, my name is Tony Weaver Jr. I'm the CEO of a media literacy education company called Weird Enough Productions. And my question is rooted in like kind of kids. Because over the course of the panel, we talked about technology, we've talked about AI, we've talked about business models. We haven't talked about kids. And if you're in education, the kids are the people that are ultimately going to be using these things, right? So my question is kind of, where is your how do you focus on kids and getting that feedback from kids? So for example, you can build the most amazing game possible to teach people about fitness, to teach people how to make healthy life decisions. But if it looks like Dora the Explorer, we're probably not touching it. Like it's not happening. Probably not going to use it. When conducting these research and when creating these types of things, how do you make sure that you're iterating feedback from your actual users? Also, lit.weirdenoughproductions.com is a totally cooler website. That's our primary one, but our platform's on lit.weirdenoughproductions.com. If you're going to show people, prefer for them to see that one.
Well, I'm just
totally put
typing
it
in
up
Google.
Yeah,
dude.
go.
So,
Lit
I-
dot.
if you don't mind, I can answer your question a little bit. So, when we did Play Forward Elm City Stories, we were targeting kids in New Haven, Connecticut as our test case for that project. The way, and I know you're trying to pull up his website, but you can pull up the picture of Play Forward, or it was a link in the browser I put on your. One of
yeah,
the
I
ways,
got
so a couple of things. One is, I would argue that you have to find clever ways to build educational media for kids because when it comes to games, because and we're lucky that we're living in an age where kids are attracted to all kinds of different types of games, not just the most amazing graphical 3D
Right.
world
Is that
versions
it,
of them.
Ben?
Yes. And so what in this particular case, our budget wasn't $30 million. So we went and we worked with comic book artists like Nate Powell, who did March for John Lewis, and we worked to come up with a graphic novel style that we thought worked. But what we also did was we convened groups of kids in New Haven, focus groups of kids, and we had them advise everything that we could. Anytime we could put something in front of them, we did. And a lot of the times, they gave us the kind of feedback that we needed. When our artists were not depicting a world that they necessarily understood so well, you know what we did? We went out and we got them all disposable sort of cameras, and we gave them the cameras, and we said, just take pictures of your everyday life. And all of that data made it into our game. So it's really about formative research and sort of ethnographic principles
Yes.
of development.
Yep,
Dana Boyd does a
Yes.
lot of
Yep.
really amazing work in talking about this. Kim Heftia from Yale's Play to Prevent project runs a lot of our formative research work with kids. And she's published some of this work in journals about what we do. We create these things
Right.
called game playbooks. So my team will do an initial draft of design just based on the subject matter expertise that we get. We don't try to do every last little detail. We do like sort of a framework. Then her team and Lynn Feline's team, who are the subject matter experts, but also the theoretical evidence minders who know the evidence-based research, they go in and then they start putting in all the theoretical elements that go in. Then we have a second wave of game designers who are going to do production. They go in and then they start embellishing it, but we're in a Google Doc all commenting. Then as we get feedback from the kids, including pictures and audio recordings from the focus groups, that information all goes in. And then it goes to production. So if you're not doing your formative work,
You owe
you're
those
in
kids
trouble.
royalties.
Well,
Yeah,
but,
no,
but-
just
but
these.
the other
yeah.
part of it is, at the end of the day, you have budgets and
Yep.
you have constraints, and you've got to
Yeah.
figure out how to be clever. So look at lots of games
Yep.
that are not state-of-the-art budgets and figure out why
Yeah.
those are working for kids.
And it's funny, I thought it would happen with maker stores and maker spaces. I thought Radio Shack might wake up and make maker spaces for kids. But if you haven't been to Macy's lately, go look at Beta, B-8-T-A. It's a pop-up shop within Macy's. They don't sell products. They have electronics. The coolest electronics, most of them are still in the crowdfunding stages. They're testing out pricing. They're testing out models. They're testing out versions. They're collecting feedback from everybody who goes in there. If you buy the product, good for you. If you want to buy it on Amazon, they let you go home. And people are paying to put their products in the store to get human feedback. And I keep thinking about education, having these places where you can go to experience the richness of all of these things, and it's probably going to be outside of the classroom.
Yeah, we're trying that. I mean, so all of our teachers at NYU have their student teaching placement sites or their clinical practice sites. And a lot of times, those schools want to partner with us to do research, right? So we have this bi-directional relationship where research is informing practice and practice is informing research. But part of the problem is you don't want to put something in front of kids during these really precious school hours that is low quality.
Right.
So that might work in like an after school, like
Right.
if you said to the kids, hey, give us your feedback, but you really don't want to waste instructional time on these other kinds of products.
Yeah,
That's
but
the
I think
first-
saying give us your feedback is different than, hey, check out these cool things and tell us what you think. You know, whether
Yeah.
it's you turn the Saturday the gym in school into a show all. And
Yeah.
I think developers would come out of the woodwork. And I think we're at this lucky place where retail in particular, it's going to be less transactional and more
Yeah.
just a fluid relationship between a customer and what they want and a person and I think kids are lacking that. And it's going back to your coding question, I think part of the reason coding is striking a chord, because one of the few areas in education where you actually can be wrong and you don't get graded, you iterate and you get better, and you iterate and you get better until you get the results you want. And I wish that we could take that model and bring it into reading and math without the, and I think that's why it struck. I mean, what it teaches you is, anticipating a problem and serial thinking, and but I think at the end of the day, you can just like play around and get stuff wrong and be okay.
All right, so we have 13 minutes left and a lot of hands. I'd like to ask the panelists to keep your answers to 13 words or less. Let's try to do a speed round. Now, I'm not talking about any particular panelist. Ben, you can have 14 words. Your hand's up. Yeah, talking to the microphone.
I just want to throw this out to you. You know who Oliver Sacks is, the neurologist? He wrote a book called Seeing Voices. Two deaf parents, most of the time, have normal hearing kids, but they need to learn sign language first. From the time they're 6 months old, they can sign for milk. But he was a neurologist. He researched it, that as you're using hand-eye coordination with sign language, you're actually laying down the neural pathways that language, syntax for reading and writing is developed.
Yeah.
So he found out that 4-year-olds who were raised this way, this is what I want to throw out to you, that when there's a spatial relationships, a test for creativity called spatial relationships. 4-year-olds who were raised this way were outperforming high school students in spatial relationships because it's just complementing the way your brain is growing and developing. I was just wondering, how do you react to that?
I think Ben would agree. Games like Guitar Hero or Dance Dance Revolution have helped open up pathways. Eric Rosenbaum did a game called Singing Fingers where you can see sound with the iPad. There's a lot of different applications for this technology.
I would jump in, I
Yeah.
think in less than 13 words, and talk about that. I think that's
Good.
an example of what I was talking about before, that it doesn't always have to be child-facing technology. That's amazing research and science that we know to be true. So how do we educate young parents around the power of cross-body movement as they're doing these songs and games? It doesn't mean putting technology in front of a 6-month-old, but it's how do we use technology to inform families and parents to make more meaningful diaper changes and work on some of those strategies. I was at a library thing where they were talking about baby sign language. It's not baby sign language, it's sign language, and a baby's learning it, right? So we have to do a better job to elevate that.
Right.
Another question from over here. Or comment.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
hear you.
Thanks, guys. My name is Dennis. First of all, this is an amazing panel, and really, you guys are a little angry, but great.
Thank you.
So,
I call it random.
I wrote down like a million questions. I've been trying to decide which ones to ask, but I think the most interesting one is probably, Warren, you mentioned that the iPad is like, you quoted someone that it's like the perfect computer. Right? It's the computer we all dream
Ann
of.
McCormick, yeah.
And I think a lot of smart people, or in general people, disagree. because in a way, it's a great device that has a lot of potential, but it's like technology is like a building material, right? It's what you do with it. It's not what it is. And I think especially with smartphones, it's actually, as the device gets smaller and fits into one hand instead of being remote, you end up having people, it ends up being so personal that it's best used by one person only. You know, and I think that's a huge problem. You sort of have, the device is narrow now. Whereas if you have a card game or something that like is in the entire room, you can just, you can share, it's automatically.
Look at Mary Flanagan's work at Till Factor Lab at Dartmouth. So she has done both iPad games and offline board games. They're the same game. She gives them to two different groups. What she's found is that the board game, paper game variety generates more discussion between participants than the iPad variety. And she goes into detail on this. This is published research that you could see around her game Pox that she did. I agree with what you're saying about phones. I think as designers, it's up to us to notice those things and figure out ways to defeat them. So games like Space Team do that. There's a lot of iPad games that are meant to be played by more than one person.
Right.
I think the Alexa, I just ordered, how many people have an Alexa? Hold your hand up. How many people ordered the dots that are coming out where you have the hands are going down, but get them, they're
$29.
yeah,
right.
it's very interesting because we play Alexa trivia in my house with my 8 and 11-year-old a lot at dinner time because of the ubiquitous of the interface. And so multiplayer games and making games less singular, I'm on to my 13th word, it's coming around, there's a lot of research going on how to do more of what you're talking about.
But
It's just a matter of doing it.
The right game for the right medium, and I would say, so your personal device, you look at it for shorter durations also, as what, shorter durations more often. Your big screen, you look at it longer durations and less often. So think about those metrics as you're moving a game from device to device.
Just the last comment. This is like a McLuhan-like thing where the medium is the message, right? We can only use our devices the way they're built and what they allow us. And have a look at Dynamic Land, everyone. Dynamic Land 1 on Twitter. It's the next project by Brett Victor, who basically invented most of the interactions you know in the iPhone. And it's a building that is a computer. You don't go in there, you don't see a computer. It's like every wall, every surface is a potential computer. And it just projects onto everything. So it's kind of amazing what people do there because everything is augmented automatically without needing any glasses or anything. So it's highly accessible. Thank you.
It's cool.
It used to be that you buy a toy, it'd say batteries required. Now it's app required. And in the children's book world, books that have apps associated with them so that when you use the camera to have something pop out of the page, sell 13% better than a book that is just a plain book. So I think what we're seeing is that the digital counterpart it's blending in. It isn't so much that something is a game or not a game. It's more that it's an experience. And that's, I think, a good thing in some ways, but it's harder to define these things. There's there's a hand back there and a hand right there. Your choice. Oh, sorry.
If
yes.
you have the mic,
Sorry.
you get the question.
Just shout out. This is New York.
Where can we find these great research-based apps, especially for preschool?
Research-based what?
Apps or softwares.
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't published what we found, and if you're looking for guidance, Common Sense Media, I'm sure, yeah, right. So they do. If you go to their educator section, then you can type in sort
Is
of.
that it?
Yeah. That's just one example.
That's not Common Sense Media, though, just to be clear.
Right.
Yeah, Common Sense Media is okay.
It's
I mean,
okay.
In terms of, it's sort of meant to be like Metacritic, but for parents.
Yeah,
We
and
agree on that.
understood.
I think honestly, you have to go and you have to dive into like Google Scholar, and you have to dive into the research basis. One of the problems for games and research is that there are only a few journals that are covering games for education or health or other things from that silo. Most of the research is in other things. So if I'm a nutritionist building a nutrition game with research efficacy, I'm writing in nutrition journals, I'm writing in reading journals. So you really have to dig. And there are some colleges that are kind of trying to build trying to cross-populate. You really should just get involved in the research field that exists. There's also HVEGA, HVEGA, which is the HEVEGA, which is the Higher Education Video Game Alliance, which is basically a group of labs and universities around the country. It's all their research and their game teaching programs, whether they're researching games or teaching kids how to make games. And that's a great conduit into finding, who's working on what's been released, what does the research basis say.
And there's two other ones I would say for early childhood. So the Tech Center at the Erickson Institute is great. They're all about digital tools in early childhood. And then the Joan Gantz Cooney Foundation, which is an extension of Sesame Street Workshop, they put out a bunch of information for families. They don't review apps, but they attempt to translate some of the research to help you make a more informed decision.
And there's Warren's site. Children's Technology
Yes,
Review
absolutely.
is incredible depth and pretty informed about the research that goes into these.
Tech Center's got a great lit review. That's Erickson, it's a Chip Donahue,
Yep.
and NYETW is trying to, that position statement's very important. And also the coding question, Mitch Resnick has really been active with his book on Scratch. I love Scratch. I've seen Scratch change lives, and I am, Ben and I, we need to just argue for an hour. But I'm sure
I have no problems with Scratch.
well, let's see if I say something, I'll get you to react. I have a problem with all of Mitch talks about it, Mitch Resnick, about all the games, he calls them games, or puzzles, that aren't really coding. And the true sense of coding, he has the 4 Ps. It's a lot of the iterative, working toward something, and I see developmentally appropriate practice rules being broken a lot when coding comes up, trying too young. And Papert, I think, was guilty of this.
I agree with that. I would just say
Oh my
Scratch is great,
It's great.
but if you know how to code like any kind of just basic scripting language, JavaScript, Lua, I think it's important to eventually, if you can, whether it's through how you steer them at school or yourselves, if you have these skills, to get your kids using languages that they can eventually use to build the kinds of things that they're going to want to build in real life. So Scratch is a great introduction, but in my mind, the faster you get someone from Scratch to something that is an environment that is, potentially the kind of thing that they want to work, which is why what Apple did with Swift Playgrounds is kind of interesting, because there's a conduit from that, drawing from, ideas around Scratch all the way up. Not necessarily endorsing that any more so than Scratch, but there's a really good website called Replit, REPL.IT. And this is basically, they have a virtual coding environment with a virtual machine for every.
What is it, Replit?
REPL.IT.
Is it like Tinker? The one TYNKER?
Yeah, right, exactly. So you can use this to teach any language, and it's a small team building this. It's probably my favorite thing I've found in the last year. And they've done it great. If there's a foundation out there, write them a big check, because
Thanks.
they deserve it.
Thanks, Ben.
Tinker also scales, I think, from block language to Python.
This has all of them. It has,
Two
every
minutes
language you can
left
imagine.
and lots of hands. Where's the mic?
I have a mic over here.
You had your hand.
Oh, Mitch's book is called Lifelong Kindergarten. Just, you didn't add that. If you want to
My
read.
question is for
Teresa.
Carolyn. So you mentioned that you've looked at a lot of the children's apps when it comes to literacy and reading. What are some of the key deciding factors that you use when you do publish and now your new research?
Yeah. So one of the things we've found, we're looking at feedback. So one thing we know is that when a kid is learning something, it's really important for them to receive feedback, especially on their errors, right, when they make a mistake. So unfortunately, in a lot of these apps, you're still seeing a kid, sorry, this is not 13 words, but if a kid gets something wrong, it's still, in many of these games, Wah, wah. Try again. Not really, right? There's no instructive feedback, right? So we pay a lot of attention to the feedback mechanisms. That's one piece. And all you have to do to sort of see that is try playing it and see what happens when you get something wrong, right? Have they used that as a moment to teach? Or is it just sort of this gamification concept and you just got like you lost a point or something? The second thing we look at and we recommend is that every early reading platform should have some kind of dashboard for parents and teachers, and those don't exist always on the commercial market. And then when you begin to look at dashboards, a lot of these dashboards don't give parents any next steps or teachers next steps, right? So one, you want there to be some kind of dashboard. You want to know at the very least, how long do my kids spend? What are they working on? Consonants or vowels? Are they just guessing? That kind of thing. And then follow up. So those are two of the things I would say.
What do you think of this one, Carolyn? This is Endless Alphabet.
So Endless Alphabet works in the sense that it's really visually appealing. There's no assessment embedded in here, and the kids receive very little feedback. Kids tend to love it because it's just really engaging. And if there were sound, you could hear that the way that they then they'll tell you the definition of exercise, and the way they give you the definition is it's very, very convoluted. And we know that the best way to teach vocabulary is through synonyms, not definitions. So they do a great job with animation, but not necessarily with meaning and not with assessment.
I have a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Do you find any software or games that you think are compatible or can work with the parents as well as in the school environment?
Yeah, there's one, I don't like to recommend anything, but the one that is pretty good is called Teach Your Monster to Read, and it's free. It's from the Usborne Foundation. It looks like a real video game. It doesn't look like a baby game. It's sort of engaging. It's one of the few that follow a scope and sequence. Like they actually follow reading research and lesson structure. And they give feedback, and there's a parent dashboard. Anecdotally, the kids that I've seen use it are really into it at first, and then they kind of drop off. And I think part of that is because the teachers and parents haven't been educated in how it's been designed. I think if they understood how it was designed, they would be more engaged with it. I'm just going to tell one quick story about that Endless Reader, even though it is a great app. I was observing in a Head Start preschool, and they were very excited because the kids are loving Endless Alphabet, and there was this hippo jumping off a diving board, and it said, flop, and then flop, the word flop bundles around, the kid's laughing, hysterical. He watches it 3 times, and the thing, the hippo goes flop, and then I said, great, so what does that say? And he's like, jump! Right, so he got the concept, right? He had no idea that was flop, and what he did was he used a similar word that he knows, right? But it was he could have been doing that all day, right? And that's not, it's better than, I guess, playing just Candy Crush, but.
So we're out of time,
Sorry.
according to my clock. Can we just go down and let everybody say your final 13 words, anything you want? Robin? Say goodbye.
So this is sad, but remember where you learned the most important thing in your life. And I don't think it was in the classroom. So just ask yourselves that and how you change that.
That's good, Robin. Die young at a very old age and play with kids. They are the best guides. Through all of this, I learn everything by hanging out with real kids. That's how I learned about Minecraft.
There are many things I could say. The thing that I find interesting for myself is there's a lot of efforts to try and use games to reinvent education. I would like to see, and I think the low-hanging fruit still is, to see games that can reinvent homework, which is desperately needed in this space. And I think also there's a lot of opportunity we are asking schools to teach more, but we're not giving them more time. Forget resources, more time. One of the reasons we made Play Forward is that we now have a way to expand the amount of time kids spend on what essentially are guidance level activities that the guidance counselors get maybe 1 or 2 days out of an entire school year for a 7th or 8th grade kid. They can now give them 13 hours of time on that topic in the form of this game, which extends that process. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can really use games as true force multipliers in these schools. And I think you really have to look at what those fits are and where that low-hanging fruit is. Good luck.
Thank you, Ben.
I think for me, it's just not losing sight of the fact that we know one of the most powerful things in education is the relationship. And technology and relationship building don't need to be separate. So folks in the audience that are part of creating new technology and things that haven't even been thought of yet, we've got to continue to be committed to not the wow factor of technology, but how does technology actually strengthen relationships between children and teachers and children and their families?
That's great. And I guess I would say that we're living in one of the healthiest and wealthiest cities with more technology than we know what to do with, and we still have 58% of third graders not reading. So I think it's unacceptable, and I think if this conference, a group of people could come together and figure out how to make it, be it a game or a platform, to teach those sub-third grade skills, call me. I think it needs to happen. Our kids need it. We're failing them.
Well, I've never moderated such a liberal arts panel in my life.
I told you it was happening.
It would only happen at NYU. So
Right.
thank you all for coming. A round of applause for the panel. And as you go out, we have one of our participants who's designed a game, right?
Yeah.
And so he wanted to demo this. This is a coding thing.
Yeah.
What
Guys,
is
I
it?
think this really fits very well. So Ben mentioned he loves REPL IT. I think very often when anyone is looking at code, even professional developers, you look at a wall of text and you need to make sense out of it in your head. And that will happen on REPL IT, and with any project will happen to any kid, even looking at a scratch something. The point is, what if you could relate sort of the changes in the code to the changes on the screen? Hey, Ben,
Yes, I'm listening.
what do you think about this?
It looks very interesting.
So the point is you can relate the changes on the screen to the changes in the code.
Right.
And by that you can teach yourself, right? You can just look
change your
up in here.
variable. Yep.
Yeah, like we can go. Let's see. Let's see. All right, this gets interesting, right? Like this right here. So I'm just going to click here. I'm going to
should
change
put
this
this
to
on
5
Chrome.
or 6
Because it's better than
or
Chrome
whatever.
stuff.
And we can go down here and we can also change the color. So I can make this any color wishes. Pink, no problem. All right, we just made it pink. We can go in here and we can make the background black, right? And that's kind of the key to move to something where kids can teach themselves by exploring whenever they see something that's interesting, right? And you kind of get rid of the teacher a little bit and you kind of bring back an instructor instead to advise. Thanks, guys. This is called Whimsical. If you want to talk about it, just let me know.
Evidence-based stuff that hasn't been translated.
Dennis Highhoff.
Yeah, and I just met with some researchers.
No, I'm one of the CEOs.